You're listening to Go with Jamarlin Martin. We have a go hard or go home approach as we talk to the leading tech leaders, politicians, and influencers. Let's go. Today we have Frederick Hutson, the founder and CEO of Pigeonly. How's it going, Frederick?
I'm doing well.
Let's dive right in. You have a super interesting story. Can we start with your background in terms of high school and kind of how did you get to the point of starting Pigeonly?
Yeah, so I grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is right outside of Tampa. And, you know, just where I grew up at, it was just the drug culture, right? So that was always around me. For the most part, though, throughout my... Yeah, St. Pete.
Did you guys have another name for it?
Yeah, we called it the Bird is what we called it.
Okay, the Bird, yeah.
So, So, you know, most of that time, you know, I managed to stay out of trouble and you know, stay on the right path for the most part. And then even, you know, one of the most successful people in my family at the time was my uncle, who I looked up to a great deal. And he was in the Air Force. So I said, you know, that's probably what I'm going to do. So I got out of high school, signed up, went into the military. And then some of my close family friends, when I was in the Air Force, they came out to Vegas. They told me what they was doing as far as moving marijuana from, at the time, Texas through to Florida, and how they was doing it and how inefficient it was. I said, you know, I can make that a lot better, make it a lot more efficient. It got so efficient, it caught the federal government's attention, and I was indicted when I was 23 for distribution of, I think the indictment was like 8,000 pounds of marijuana or something like that. So it was during that time when, you know, when I went to prison, and I just started noticing and seeing this huge population of people that no one's paying attention to, and more importantly, that everyone had the same problem. It was very difficult and expensive to stay in touch. And then what I didn't know at the time, which I learned later, was that my observation of how often people could stay in touch, how difficult it was backed by over 40 years of research showing that people who couldn't afford, didn't have the financial means to stay in touch, were more likely to get in trouble, more likely to be back in prison. The people who could maintain those family connections, those are the folks I didn't see come back. Long story short, got out around 2012. Got with my co-founder, Alfonso, who I had known for a good while, you know, while I was in the Air Force. And we started what's now Pigeonly, which in a sentence is basically a platform that makes it easy for people to search, find, and communicate with the incarcerated loved one. So today, you know, we have customers over in 88 countries, and, you know, we're shipping over 3,000 to 4,000 orders a day all over the United States. We do a little over 2 million phone minutes a month. So, you know, now we've gotten to the point where we're pretty well known in the industry as far as at least one of the largest independent providers for providing that communication.
You were incarcerated for selling drugs.
Yeah.
Was it marijuana or all types of drugs?
Marijuana.
Okay,
yeah,
got it.
Yeah.
And would you say that your experience in the Air Force helped you in the drug game?
Nah,
in terms of it gave you kind of a unique...
Yeah, I would say what I got from the Air Force was discipline. It really taught me a lot of discipline.
Yeah.
It really taught me how important it is to have a process to everything that you want to do. Because, you know, the military has a process for every single thing, right? They have it's really outlined, and it's very rare you can do something that's not, you know, on a program like that. So that's something that I took forward, and that's something I was very disciplined about regimen, because, you know, we, had people in 3 different countries. So, and over, 50, 60 people you're managing, and, it's not your typical employee, a type of employee that you're managing, right? So it took a lot of discipline. It took a lot of process to be able to manage it, at the level we was doing it. And I would say that's probably some of the things that I took with me then that I even still to this day, because, for most part, business is business. It really doesn't matter, whether you're selling marijuana or whether you're selling cupcakes. For the most part, it's all the same process.
Yeah, I'm thinking that unique experience probably, not a lot of people, if anybody, in St. Pete are pushing, marijuana.
Right.
But they've been into that system of the Air Force where, you put the streets and that together, you may have a competitive advantage, and that may have, of course, helped you in tech as well. You get busted. How did that come about?
Yeah, so it was going on for about maybe, 3-4 years, something like that. Nah, probably closer to 4 or 5 years, actually. And it was just one day. So at the time, because the volume was getting so much, we had to get to the point where we had tractor trucks, and it was just so large where we had to graduate from just using shipping centers. And I used to go to different UPS stores and mailbox et ceteras and FedExes and things like that to ship it, and got to the level where it wasn't enough. So then I opened up my own mail store so that I would be able to have the means to be able to ship as much as I want. So one day I was at that store and it was really quiet. A couple of my friends that was in St. Pete, I hadn't heard from. Usually, I would hear from people pretty early on the West Coast because, it's early on the East Coast. So I would hear from people around 6, 7 in the morning. I didn't hear from any people that day. So the day just started out feeling weird. And then
I'm thinking of Johnny Depp's movie Blow, where it's like the final run.
It just didn't feel that morning. It just didn't feel right because it was a little bit. It was a few days after a big shipment had went down, so I was waiting for the money to come back from the East Coast. So we're not talking about $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So that stuff was like clockwork. So that morning just felt very strange because usually, we would have our check-ins and messages and stuff like that. And it was just silent. And then so I said, I'm not going to strip out. This is not the first time that, we've had scares. It's not the first time that something has went sideways. It was just a part of the process and part of the business where shit will go sideways more often than not. So it didn't throw me off right away, but it just didn't feel right. So I ended up going to the store, and then about 5 or 6 cars just pull up, all unmarked cars, and agents jump out with guns drawn. And at that point, I knew what was happening. So, they took me into the federal building, which was maybe about 15, 20 minutes away from there. And they read me my charges, and that was the beginning of the end.
It was all good a few weeks ago. So did you have kind of some team members that kind of took you out?
No, so the thing about drugs is that you can't do everything by yourself, right? So at some point you're going to involve other people, and the more people you involve, the more opportunities or more links that can be broken, right? And that's what happened, right? So you had
bigger, more risk.
we had UPS drivers and FedEx drivers and DHL drivers on payroll. Then you have UPS drivers that start making a lot more money than what they're used to, and then you start going to work at UPS and you trade in your Camry for a Porsche truck. People gonna start asking questions. Yeah. So that's how it is. You start asking the right questions to the right people, start applying the right pressure. Before you know it, people say, okay, yeah, it's not coming from me, it's coming from there. And then before you know it, I was the last person they picked up because I was far removed.
You were the
from
big
it.
guy.
Right,
you were the don.
So it was just at the end of the chain. So it's just one of those things where it just went upstream. So
okay, got it. So you spent time in the pen, 4 years. What was that experience like? Like, what does the public get wrong about spending kind of years in the pen?
It's different. So I can speak on federal because my time was in the federal institution, so which is a lot different than states. But from the federal side, it really depends. So, I went in when I was 23. So because of my age and because of the crime, so one of the things that the government has is if you have over a certain amount of drugs, even if it's marijuana, they classify you as a violent offender. So because we had at least my indictment was over 1,000 kilograms, it classified me as a violent offender. So I had to do things like register in Vegas as a violent offender and all those other kind of things. And what that also does is that when you go to prison, they raise your security level so that instead of going to a camp or going to a low institution, you shoot straight to the top and you go to a penitentiary, which is the worst of the worst, right? So you might have 5-6 year sentence, but you're doing time with somebody who has life. So it creates a very different dynamic. But what I will say is one of the things that the way the institutions and just the culture of prison is that everything is really driven by respect. You give respect, but then you also have to know how to demand respect back. And that's pretty much how it is.
Were you tested there?
Yeah, things will happen. Like, for example, I'll tell you a funny story. So in the room, there's just an open room. And you have TVs on the wall, and all the TVs have like radio tuners, so that in order for you to hear the TV, you tune your radio. So first thing you do in prison, you buy a radio, and then you can tune to the radio. You can listen to the music, or you can watch whatever's on the television. So guys that's been there a while, they have spots. So if you don't know what somebody's spot is, and a spot is not distinguishable from another spot. It's just a spot on the floor that this is this guy's spot, and this is where he'll put his chair to watch his show. So when I was there maybe not that long, maybe a couple weeks, and I put my chair in the wrong spot. So I'm sitting in someone's spot. I don't know whose spot I'm sitting in.
You don't know the rules.
I don't know, right? Yeah. So the thing that's interesting is that everything is segregated. So all the races stay together. So the blacks with the blacks, the whites with the whites, the Mexicans with the Mexicans. There's some Mexican gangs that roll with the blacks. There's some Mexican gangs that roll with the whites, and some Mexican gangs that roll by themselves. Because I did it with my time mostly on the West Coast, the gang culture is very, very strong on the West Coast. So,
and what state were you in?
At this time, I was in Arizona.
Arizona, okay, got it.
Yeah, so institutions on that side of the country is majority Mexican, right? So any conflict that you have, I can have a conflict with one individual. It doesn't end with me. It turns to all the blacks now have a conflict with this, whatever group that person came from, with all his group. Yeah. So that's what happened. So in the TV room, because me and this guy had this convict, then all of a sudden it was Mexicans against the blacks because of that conflict, right? So that was one of those things where, they put everybody on lockdown and it was all crazy, but it just gets crazy because, and that's just one of many offenses. There was guys, it was just a dispute over a washing machine, and we had a riot, and the riot went on for days. So it's just things
it's like
that
individual conflict is like tribal conflict.
Absolutely, that's just how it is. So and it's one of those things where where you from. So you have the groups within a group. So if you're from Florida, you with the Florida guys are within the blacks, and then the blacks are just as a whole. Or if you're a Crip, then you're a Crip within the Crips, and then the Crips are within the blacks as a whole, and then that's how it goes.
You take this experience and you come up with an innovative solution, Pigeonly. Talk about putting the idea in place, and kind of how far away is that from you getting out of jail? Yeah,
so while I was prison, what I used to spend my time doing after you adjust, right? So it takes a lot of time to get adjusted. You're in a whole different world.
Yeah.
Once you kind of get that adjusted, and you kind of get into your routine, whether it's working out, going to the law library, going to the regular library, whatever it is that you do, then you start figuring out how to program. What you call inside, you call it programming, because you have to figure out how to do the time, or else you just lose your mind, right? So you basically set up this program with, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, and do that, and it just uses up your day. And that's how you can get through the day. So what I used to do was, after working out, obviously, and reading and things like that, I would just brainstorm business ideas, and I would just make the whole business model in my head or on paper, whatever I had access to. So I would go through every step from just envisioning how much money I would need to what I would buy, how many people I would employ. And I would just basically, it was just my way of, for lack of a better word, of just mental exercise, just to kind of go through the process of at least what I thought, at least what I understood. The cool thing about federal prison is that what you're also with are with a lot of white collar guys, right? So these are the guys who were at Fortune 500 companies and who are tax evasion, or there was a lot of politicians and things like that. So you get a very, very diverse group of people, when it comes to federal institutions. So I had a lot of people around me that I leveraged for mentors, and they would teach me, not only the language of business in some cases, but also the steps that you have to take. And I would just apply that to all the different problems that I would see. So I've always naturally been good at identifying a problem and building a solution for it. But, a lot of those guys turned to my mentors and how to put a framework around that. And, what is it like to build a financial model, things like that I didn't know before. I learned a lot of that in jail. So, and that's what I did. So I did that for several business ideas, whatever I can come up with. Some were stupid, some made sense, some didn't. But it was all about practice for me. It was all about that mental exercise for me. It necessarily wasn't about actually doing it. It was really about just going through that mental exercise of going through all those steps. By the time I got released, I almost felt like I did that shit already before. You know what I'm saying? So it really went down from the outside looking in. People was looking at us, and they was looking at the speed at which we was getting things done. But it almost felt like I had ran through this and through my mind over and over and over and over for years with different ideas.
You're saying that you had Pigeonly in your mind while you were locked up?
Yeah. Okay, I actually tried to give it to, we laugh about this now, but one of my dudes that was in my housing unit, I actually tried to give the idea to him because I had so many ideas of things I wanted to do, and I was like, "Hey, why don't you do this?" He's like, "No, I don't want to do that." I was like,
"Are you thinking about subscription and stuff like that?"
I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about just a business to make it easy at the time for people to be able to upload and send photos from their phone and have those photos shipped and delivered. That's as far as it went at the time.
Yeah, what I love about your experience is that we can get into technology and the startup game, and maybe some people want to go work, use this and go work at Facebook or work at Google or whatever. But we can also solve problems
Yeah.
that are specific to us, and we can weaponize it to lift our people up.
Right.
You know, it's not just kind of, hey, get into STEM or get into tech. You know, you can go into the pipeline, the Silicon Valley pipeline, but you can also get into this game and create positive weapons for us, people
Right.
who look like us.
Right.
You spend 4 years,
Almost
5 years in the pen. And how do you feel about white folks being structured to legalize marijuana and then start making billions while there's so much pain and suffering
Right.
among the black poor who are doing the same thing under an illegal, so-called illegal regime? How, you know, you have a lot of skin in the game on this issue.
Yeah.
How does that
I mean,
make you feel?
I think one of the things that kind of shows and reminds you the world that we lived in is the fact that I have a felony with marijuana that prevents me from ever being able to participate in the legal marijuana business. And that's not just me, that's anybody that has a felony. You won't even be able to qualify for a license. So it's what we've seen time and time again where there's systematic and systemic things that are in place that allows one group of people to be more prosperous than others. I mean, it's no different. We don't start on the level playing field. We don't start at the same line. Even if you've never seen a day of prison, if you've never been outside the law in your life, you still don't start off on an equal platform as your white counterpart. It's just not true.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, you know, we, at least for me personally, you know, it makes me more so, you know, one, be conscious of it and then do what I can to be involved in policies and to make sure that I can use whichever leverage that I have and network that I have to make sure I'm in the rooms when these policies are discussed and when those things are happening, because that's the only real way we're going to see change. I mean, there's more to just voting and all that. It's really about putting your money and energy to have people pushing your agendas like what other groups do. And I think that's what we're missing.
In terms of like lobbying and special
lobbyists,
interest
right.
group.
And I think that's what we have to start thinking that way if we really want things to turn our way. Because other than that, you know, it's just somebody, you know, that you want, you know, do something for you. But when you think of other groups and you look at other initiatives that have happened, you know, you can pick whatever initiatives that's happened in the past. You know, they had a group that not only was pushing for something, but they're also putting their resources and energy behind that to put that person in the front to say, hey, we're hiring you to get this job done, so to speak.
It sounds like what you're talking about is the design of the monopoly board is so much more important than whatever the thimble is doing in terms of...
Absolutely.
For black people, we're getting caught up on these micro issues. These issues may be important. How someone looks, the gender, someone said this, someone make you feel a certain way.
Right.
But the monopoly board is based on lobbying, money, and special interest.
Yeah.
Those are the people
Play the game.
who are designing the policies
Right.
and your oppression. According to Eric Schmidt, the former CEO and then the chairman of Google, he said lobbyists write all the laws. So why aren't we?
We're just not thinking that way.
Yeah,
we're just
why
not
aren't we focused on that? He's telling you that.
Yeah, I think we're just not. And I had no idea we was gonna get into all this, but we're just gonna roll with it.
Yeah.
But you know, it's one of the things that, you know, we started paying attention to with our company is that we realized that in order for us to really be disruptive, I mean, we're going against two multi-billion-dollar organizations that are in our space that basically have the correction space locked up when it comes to communications. And I learned early on.
You're talking about the private prison complex.
Exactly.
Industrial complex.
Right.
Yeah.
So what started exposing me to what we're talking about is I realized that we can have as good as a product as we want. We could have all the investing funding that we need. But unless you have the right people in the right room that's pushing your interests, you're not going to get anywhere. So I'll give you an example.
The lobbyists have so much power.
It's just you're not going to get anywhere. So I'll give you an example. So over the past 10 years, there's been a huge battle in the FCC when it comes to like phone rate blocking. So basically what these phone companies were doing, these prison phone companies in particular were doing, was that if you was a consumer and you signed up for, let's say, Pigeonly or a company similar to Pigeonly, and that would allow you to save rates on, allow you to save money on your phone calls, they will block your calls. So essentially what they was telling Jamarlin is that you can't use Sprint, you can't use AT&T, you have to use this provider, because they knew that that would guarantee that they would be able to get the most revenue out of you. Yeah. So what we did and what we learned the hard way is that we had to invest in attorneys and lobbyists to make sure our interest was heard, to say, yo, this is fucked up. You should not be able to do that. You should not be able to dictate to a consumer what phone company they can and can't use. So this went on for years. We put a lot of money into that. And the law eventually passed where you can't do that anymore, right? So now it is illegal for that to happen. That wasn't illegal a few years before.
Is that a specific state level, or
no? That's federal. That's federal.
Okay,
that's FCC wide.
Yeah.
So that's just a small example. You played
a part in
that.
that.
That's a small example of us pushing our interests, talking to the right people,
and banging against the lobbyists,
and then pushing an agenda that not only was good for us, but also was good just for the consumer, because the consumer should not be forced to always have to make a call a certain way that ensures a company to make the highest profit.
No competition.
That doesn't make sense, right? So, but it's been that way for years. Just and the people that's paid the price of that was all brown and black folks.
Yeah.
But they was complaining. They were sending all the letters that they want, but until someone actually put dollars and effort into it and put the right people in a room that has the influence, it doesn't change. And that's true with any policy, major policy shifts. And that's what we're starting to see with criminal justice. All this criminal justice talk that you're seeing, this is not just, you see all the people that are talking about it, but behind the scenes, you have people that have financial interests in changing this. Yeah. So you have the Koch brothers, you have a lot of big people that are putting lots of money into what we just see, and we feel like, oh, everybody's talking about criminal justice now. And so I think as a people, if we start understanding how the game works, we can start playing the game for our own benefit.
We need to think bigger in terms of
absolutely.
lobbying. Yeah, I would say, when you hear a lot of black voters who are politically active, lobbying in special interest groups doesn't make their top 5.
Right.
That's a problem. Right. Because that's where the design of the monopoly board, of course, is taking place. So your revenue model, where do you generate the most revenue?
For us, so we have a subscription-based model. So right now people can basically, they can pick and choose. We have 6 consumer-facing products. So we have the phone product, which obviously is our most popular.
How does the phone product work?
So it's very similar to a Google Voice or Skype. When you sign up, you tell us, I want to be able to receive a call from John Smith. One of the things that's unique to us is that we built a database that tracks everyone who's in the system. It tracks every institution. It knows information like what's the phone rates at this given prison, what's the address, what's the visitation rules, what's the pricings. It knows
built this out.
Yeah, and it tracks it out. There's over 17,000 facilities that this is tracking 24/7, because each institution is different. You can be literally across the street from each other. They're completely different. So when you go to our site and you put in John Smith, it'll look and allow you to, show up where John Smith is. You can say, okay, cool, I want to be able to get calls from John Smith. You can press the phone button. It'll give you a telephone number. And then going forward, John Smith will call that number instead of your regular number to be able to reach you. And then when he calls the Pigeonly number, we'll connect that call to your existing cell phone or landline. And then in doing so, we're routing the call the cheapest way possible. So, for example, instead of paying, for example, federal prison, it's 300, you get to speak 300 minutes, so it costs $70 at 23 cents a minute.
Yeah.
With our service, those same 300 minutes cost you 18. Okay, so it's more expensive to not be a Pigeonly customer than it is to be a Pigeonly customer.
Okay, got it. And how many of your customers are black in the United States?
I don't know that stat, but if I use the prison stat, I would say the majority. I would say, majority.
Subscriptions, you got phones.
So we have phones, we have letters, postcards, greeting cards, articles. So basically, we just give people multiple options on how to stay in touch. Basically, try to connect all of us who live in this digital world to this population that lives in a mostly analog world.
Okay, got it. Could I use your platform to type a letter online and then you're going to send it out?
Right. So basically what it works is that you'll type the letter, you can sign it with your finger just to kind of give that personalized touch. And then you hit the send button and then it goes to our fulfillment company. And then it's printed to ship to mail. And then the inmate will receive the actual tangible letter that you typed in like 3 to 5 days.
Can you talk to the problem of, a lot of our people some family members get lost in the system.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So can you talk about how big a problem that is?
That's
and how you're
one of
addressing it?
that's one of the things that why we built what we call Haystack. And what Haystack is basically our platform that makes it very hard for someone to be lost in the system. Because one of the things that we found out, at least from my experience as well, is that I was in 8 different institutions. So it was some of my close family friends that couldn't even find me, right? And there's some attorneys that can't find their clients because you bounce around so much. And it's not like there's some customer service line you can call at a jail and say, hey, I'm looking for somebody, or where's this person at? Or you don't get no notification. It just happens. Yeah. So when I saw that, I said, we can tie all these databases together. And one of the problems is that you would think that this wouldn't be the case, but states don't talk to each other. Institutions don't talk to each other. So you can go from one institution to another. There's no communication between the two. So, for example, the way criminal justice data is stored and tracked in California is completely opposite than how it's stored and tracked in Texas, than how it's stored and tracked in Florida. And none of these things talk to each other. So basically what we built was a software layer on top of that to tie all these independent data sources together. So you can have one centralized database that can kind of see from a 50,000 foot view of everything that's going on across the system. So what that helps, for example, we have a lot of attorneys that use our service to be able to know at any time where their loved one is, or where their client is, or whoever they're trying to see, they can see where that person is. Even though all that data is there, it's just not tied together. It's very antiquated the way it's set up today.
You have your business model thought out before you get out. It's time to get investors.
Right.
Talk about that process.
Yeah, so I mean, when we started, I didn't know what I didn't know. So we first built the first version of Pigeonly, which was a very basic, ugly, barely working but worked way for people to upload photos, send it.
How did you get your first developer? Did you go to Odesk or something like that?
That's similar with the freelancer.com.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's what I did early in the game, man. This is scrappy.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you went on there, you post a job, and, we got that first person, and I was looking for someone that I can just talk plain English to, because once again, I didn't know the speech. Now I can speak fluent developer talk, but at the time I couldn't, right? So, I had to hire someone that I can just speak in plain English and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, this is what I'm trying to build. And then they can convert that into functional specs that an engineer can use to actually build something that is pretty close, if not exactly what you want. Because there's always a disconnect a lot of times between the business parties and the engineering team, or the design side of the house and engineering team. A lot of times it disconnects between the two. But when we had somehow figured out how to get the product done. We got the product built, Alfonso and I, and then I was watching CNN one day, and CNN special Black in America came on, and it was talking about the NUMI accelerator. At the time, I didn't know what an accelerator was. I never heard of an accelerator. We had talked to a couple people in Tampa about investment, but they was like,
Florida,
not
carrying any weight.
They was like, what, you invest in? What tech? What, do you have any assets? I'm like, what assets? It's software, right? So
Florida's low. At least I know at this time, Florida would be super low on tech and high on crazy.
They don't understand. They just don't get it, right? So I almost started to give up on that, and we was just focused on making revenue, right? Yeah. So then I saw this thing, and it was talking about Silicon Valley. I'm like, what the hell is that? And then I started reading about it and Googling, and I was like, yo, there's a place where they embrace this, and they're giving people money if you have a tech business. I think we kind of qualify as a tech business. So I started applying to all of them that I could find. I applied to Y Combinator, I applied to Techstar, I applied to NUMI Accelerator, I applied to everyone that I could find an application for. I even found one, I forget the name of it, they've gone now, but there was one in Tampa that I even applied to, right? They all said no. A few months rolled around, the next class was coming out, I did the same thing again.
Did they ever give you feedback, any of them? No.
They would just say, no, we didn't accept you. They have, they let you down softly, keep pushing, doing a great job, but whatever.
I got to think they're thinking, the market's not big enough. This is some off the wall shit right here.
Right. And I'll get to that.
I'll
get to the
market side.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
People. Yeah. So then the second go around, we got a response from NUMI, and it was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the class was about to start. And at the time, I'm on probation. I'm not allowed to leave the state. So I pick up and I leave. And I said, I'll just figure out the rest later. And I'm like, man, I hope I don't get stopped. I hope I don't get pulled over, because I'm about to violate my probation. They're going to send me right back to jail. So I get out to San Francisco to start the program. And then, I would be in a program and I'll shoot back to Florida so that I could be around if the probation came around. Eventually, I sent the letter of acceptance that we was getting this program, and I sent it to the probation officer, and they gave me approval to travel. And then while I was in Excel, I was the only person in Excel that had the probation officer showing up at the damn accelerator house, and the other guys looking around like, who the hell is this coming, flashing a badge and stuff around? But that was just a part of what I had to go through. So, long story short, as we went through that program, at the end of it, we was the only company that had a tangible working product with customers and was making money every day. And it wasn't because we knew that was important to have. It's because we didn't know anything different. We didn't know that. We thought that was the norm, right?
Like,
so
you didn't know, like, hey, I'm messing around and get in a situation. I can lose money for 7 years.
Exactly. So we just was doing what we thought we had to do. And basically, when it was time for demo day and was time to talk to the first batch of investors that they introduced us to, we stood out because we knew what our customer acquisition costs were. We knew, what our revenue per day was. We knew what our growth rate from week to week was. So we knew what those things were. And it validated that at the bare minimum, if people didn't understand what we were doing because they never heard it before, because most investors, that's what they said. We never heard anybody approach it. We've heard just about every variation of every type of pitch in the world. We haven't heard anybody talk about anything remotely close to this market. We was one of the very first companies to even talk about doing what they're starting to call justice tech and all this kind of stuff now. There wasn't a thing then. Yeah. So people had to at least pay attention to us because we had tangible numbers, and a lot of what would be considered our peers, not necessarily in the class, but just a new company starting out. A lot of them didn't have customers. A lot of them didn't have revenue and things like that. And we had that, right? So a lot of them didn't have a customer acquisition strategy that worked. So, people had to pay attention to us at that point. And that's how we was able to secure our first $1 million in seed funding.
This is part 1. Tune in to the next episode for part 2. Thanks, everybody, for listening to Go. You can check me out at Jamarlin Martin on Twitter, and also come check us out at Moguldom.com. That's Moguldom.com. Be sure to subscribe to our daily newsletter. You can get the latest information on crypto, tech, economic empowerment, and politics. Let's go.